Peace and love, everybody. Salute to all my beautiful people. I wanted to begin this segment of Black No Sugar with a very poignant and piquant topic of discussion. With the current landscape of the political so-called shift that is taking place in this country, I've been coming across myriad perspectives among our people that pretty much all seem to be geared toward this idea or this fantasy of a final solution, right? And that somehow this election is a resting spot or something, that can be done one time and that can stand to provide the ultimate answer. Unfortunately, that's not how things work. There is no press the button one time and all of your problems will be solved by way of this one action. There is no such thing that exists, to my knowledge. I think that the state of fancy that people of our culture have with this mindset is very disheartening, if I'm being honest. And as I watch all the things taking place on the periphery, I'm led to question more and more what it is that we are dealing with and all of the factors that are at hand and at work. It seems to me that we have been trained to expect that our plight as Black people, that our issues as Black people will all be taken care of, with the click of a heel and, will bring an outcome that's going to resemble something like a movie with a predictable happy ending. You know those movies, right? But politically, that's just not the reality for us. Politically, Black people in this country, in my view, have been so thoroughly run amok that we've come to the point where we are not even reticent anymore about falling into old traps. Okay? Old traps instead have become something like a second skin for many of us. Okay? Something that we have familiarized within and among ourselves to the point that we have taken those old traps as truths. We've taken the traps as truths. No matter how obvious those traps are, no matter how overtly expressed, a framework may prove that it is not within our best interest as a Black culture. Many of us are still inclined to run toward that illusion with alacrity and with an expectancy that what will be found is something contrary to what we know the result will bring. It's wild to me, and it's a sort of dementia at this level and at this juncture. It's a sort of dementia that the collective faces on many levels. It's a forgetting of lessons that we thought we learned years ago or that we assumed we've learned years ago. So that when we enter into new phases, we do not bring the wisdom with us because there has been a vehement refusal to accept reality so that we can learn the lessons presented us historically and presently. For the past several weeks, the electoral climate has evinced quite a bit to me. And one is, how much Black culture seems to be stuck in a vacuum. On one hand, there's a semblance of an idea of our history, right? That we can kind of vaguely account for or vaguely point to in some cloud somewhere. Right? We know that we are coming off of, for example, things like the civil rights era, quote unquote, as it's referred to. Okay, we know that we are, let's say, coming off of an era known as the war on drugs, right? Back in the 80s and into the 90s. We have a semblance of an understanding about things like mass incarceration and that it affects a grossly disproportionate amount of our people, right? There is a sense of these things lingering around among us. We've heard those terms before, yet it exists on the periphery. There's a vagueness to the realization of these things as reality. It exists on the periphery because we have taken on a passive mentality about systemic issues that are unique to our community. What we also fail to recognize is that none of the said issues have ceased to exist by way of our running to the polls to vote. It didn't stop them from taking place in 1965, and it isn't stopping them in 2025. The issues persist, virtually unchanged. I mean, just think about it. Gargantuan numbers of Black bodies imprisoned have not stopped because we voted. Guns and drugs in our community has not ceased being brought in because we voted. None of the civil rights issues of 60 years ago have ceased to exist today, nor have they been diminished in any way because of who we were voting for over the years. Now, I don't intend to persuade anyone from not voting. What I'm attempting to do here is to draw some much needed attention to the reality of this matter, that our issues have not vanished because we voted Democrat or Republican. I find it to be a major concern beyond the fact that our votes alone change no part of the landscape that affects our daily lives in this country, but moreover, that our mindset over the years hasn't gone into the next gear. Our mindset hasn't gone into the next stage of thinking that would propel us and that would force us to combat the monotony and the state of limbo that we have remained in for decades upon decades upon decades. This is what I want to get to the heart of, and what I think Black people, who are serious and who are looking to optimize our living and our mobility in this country and wherever we stand, this is what we should be speaking about and thinking about as readily as possible. I must posit that I am completely appalled by the spectacle of the going electoral geography right now. I think that goes without saying, right? In my view, neither party has showcased a care or concern whatever for the interests of Black people, for the matters affecting Black people throughout the nation. But you know what? That goes without saying, right? It's just a continuation of the old legacy at work here. This is what we are seeing now with the current political landscape. It goes without my astonishment at this point, to be honest. However, upon my analysis and sitting back and watching things, it seems to me that there is an increasingly more and more of an effort made as time passes to efface the Black presence from this country as a whole, to efface our presence, our issues, our concerns, and the things particular and specific to us. Now, I'm not sure if y'all peeped it, but there is much more emphasis on the lack of acknowledgement of Black people. Black issues are altogether pretty much swiped aside. It's virtually made to have no visibility whatsoever. Okay? And it's set in a position that it forces one to be oblivious and inattentive to the fact that Black people have our own specific and particular matters and circumstances within this nation, and issues and matters that are unlike any other people group in this country. These things are virtually made non-existent to our people, and our people are accepting it as such as well. It's not only to the larger culture or to the general American populace. Black people are themselves finding a normalcy within a lack of visibility. And that is very problematic if we are going to change anything, or if we think we stand a chance to. But yes, Black people, inhabit a very unique position within this nation as far as our circumstances and how they are particular to us. Circumstances that lay within and have formed the bedrock of all issues in this country, real talk. Yet, the Black conversation is repeatedly and intentionally overlooked and downcasted. Okay? Sure, you can be given the illusion that you are being addressed, Black people, right? With words like urban and poverty and inner city, right? Those key code words, right? And you could even get pandered to, for example, by having Meg Thee Stallion's ass and pussy thrown in your face, right? You can give the illusion of inclusion that they are caring about you with this Black figure in front of you, right? You'll have a rapper or a basketball player here or there thrown in the mix, and who fails miserably at articulating the purpose and drive behind their support for a particular candidate or another, and what issues they find most imperative concerning Black people, fail miserably at it. Don't speak a word about it. But here is this Black caricature in front of your face to give you the illusion of the inclusion. But the reality is that with all the Black pandering that is happening, disgracefully, by the way, you are not being spoken to, even though these Black figures, Black pawns, are being moved on the board in front of you. They're not talking to you. They are talking above your head. They are talking with their backs turned to you. You are not being addressed. What is being addressed is the idea of the Negro, quote unquote, they created, the mindset, the framework. That is what they are addressing. They are addressing the mentality that they betted on within you, that is afraid of questioning everything. The caricature of you, the Frankenstein, the zombie, okay? The zombie that they work so hard to create within the Black populace. That's what they are speaking to, and hoping will follow their lead blindly and without question. The one who will not look at themselves and make necessary changes, make no demands, and who will certainly not participate in any learning of lessons. This is who Megan Thee Stallion is twerking for. Now, I want to make clear, that this is not about Democrats versus Republicans, if I haven't made that clear already. This is about us. How can we galvanize an interest toward ourselves and our prosperity in America? That's a real conversation. And this is what we are not talking about enough, in my view. We are instead talking about, how terrible Trump is at this time, how Black or not Black Kamala is at this present time, But all the while, we are not looking at our homes. We are not looking at our children, at our husbands, at our wives, at our friends. We are not looking at the fact that the way to establish power in this country is through the building of our own institutions, of our own corporations. Because make no mistake, it is the corporation that runs this country, not the vote. The power is in the businesses. The vote is pretty much just a check-in on the public, done once every 4 years to make sure that you guys are still playing along, right, with the game that's being run on you. But while many of us are waving our red or blue flags, how many of us are having conversations about how we begin to make Black enterprise the focus of our discussions, the focus of our thoughts, our motives, and actions? How do we do that? Black people have been voting majoritively Democrat since the Voting Rights Bill was amended in 1965. In my assessment, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was pretty much a campaign to convert Black people into being predominantly pushed toward the interest of the Democratic Party's gains and agendas. That's what it appears to be to me. Right? We have the promise of equal housing via the vote, the promise of decent health care via the vote, the promise of decent education via the vote, and all the other promises that were made to lure our people into becoming a permanent and fixed voting populace for a particular party and their agenda. Because we were the marginalized people, the heirs of second-class citizenry, we were then given the illusion of integration into a just system of equality. The government wanted to be able to capitalize on our huge numbers, so they invented a way to inculcate into us this idea that we should express and showcase loyalty to, let's say, a Kennedy at that particular time in the 60s, or whatever Democrat thereafter, so that the goal was to assuage the angst within us and within our minds of the racist system at work that we are dealing with on a day-to-day basis, such that we'd ultimately feel that somehow we can reap the benefits of equality, right? That we'd finally be, quote unquote, seen as what? As Americans. The Republicans definitely fell in line, and they carried on with their coded language during that time of the 60s. They carried on their race and identity politics. They catered to white fear and delusion. And they herded our people to the far left, where we thought it was safer, more understanding and liberal. What we did not pay attention to was the fact that a snake is also a master of camouflage, among other things. The higher the grass of illusion among snakes, the easier it is to be bitten by what you fail to see coming. Not what you don't see coming, but what you fail to see coming. What I think is absolutely imperative for us to divulge and question and assess is the question of, what has our running to the polls to vote, overwhelmingly Democrat, brought to our scope of living in this country? That's a serious question for us at this time. What has it brought directly to counteract systemic racism still prevalent, still in place, and still hindering our progress in this country? How have the modalities of virulent and systemic racism diminished since the days of our ancestors, the days of our grandmothers, the days of our fathers? Right? In 1870, the 15th Amendment was added to the Constitution, and it prohibited all states from depriving us the right to vote, right? Based on race, based on having previously been enslaved. What's interesting is that during the Reconstruction era, Black people majoritively voted Republican, believe it or not. Okay? It was, in fact, the Republican Party who ensured that Black people were able to vote in this country. This is why predominantly, Black people supported it at that particular time. And as some of you know, we had some viable successes among our people during this time. Flourishing businesses, towns, hospitals were set up, schools, banks, all our own, all types of things. But our establishments were quickly terrorized and torn completely asunder by whites who found us unfit in their eyes to hold the right of being protected and served under the law. Our history in this country has repeatedly shown us that no matter what side of the fence you are on, a vote alone will not bring salvation or restitution to our people. The vote alone will not uplift our people. We tend to have and cling, to this fantasy that should we perhaps get enough people to go to the polls, we'll be free of this type of castigation, historical castigation. You tell me in what society that has been the case. Everything earned has been fought for. With hands, with feet, with minds, daily action, self-understanding, education, force, courage, fierceness, blood, prayer, family, heart, and everything that is within someone. That's how you get your retribution. A ballot could never garner such a thing. So I don't know why such emphasis is being placed there. Actually, I do know why, but it baffles me, why culturally it's not something that we are willing to grapple and understand. I don't know why, we choose to be lulled to sleep by distractions. We prefer our distractions over our realities. And of course, it's to the degree that, in coping with reality, you will be dealing with some pain. There will be some hard work involved. And perhaps we've grown weak to the point and to the capacity that, we are unable to exemplify courage at this particular point. We have created a culture of couragelessness. And that's something that we definitely have to put on the table and completely discard as quickly as possible. That's the root work right there. And it isn't anything that's going to happen in a day, but it is definitely something that we should spend our days examining and healing. I think many of us know, that we've watched grandmothers, grandfathers, uncles, mothers, and brothers of all types of kin within our circles exemplify habits that should be put into question and put under a microscope. I think a lot of this plays into the dynamic of the family structure. In fact, all of it, I posit, is because it is how and where we receive our origin of education, our basis of history. I'd even go into quoting the beautiful and the great ancestor, Dr. Amos Wilson, where he says, history is a key part of a people's culture and behavioral orientation. The history of your people is not only a memorial to the great people of your past. But the history of your people is a history of techniques, a history of methods of coping with problems and solving problems. The history of your people passes on to you the learned methods and techniques of dealing with various issues. This is the great ancestor Amos Wilson, and he's absolutely correct. If the behavioral patterns that we are learning and passing on from one generation to the next are not passing on nourishment, upliftment, proper education for our bloodlines, for our culture, for our communities, then what is it that we are passing on? Are we going to continue to pass on misinformation? Are we going to pass on terrible relationship management qualities? Are we going to pass on the glorifying of masculinity via violence and misogynistic undertones? Are we going to continue to pass on a woman's worth and a woman's value based on her sexual availability? We forget that these things are also political. Our day-to-day lives is the political. What we do, how we talk, how we walk. All of this exemplifies and carries over political thought. So that it's prime time, I think, for us to realign our minds, to begin questioning why we keep such mindsets and actions that act against our cultural upliftment. Okay? What can we do to remove ourselves from the perpetual immobility of consciousness among our people? A lack of mutability towards our own interests, and a lack of desire to change from one form to the next as needed in our day-to-day lives. When do we set that aside? When do we remove the accumulated trash of the past 400 years, of the past 60 years, of the past 20 years, and so forth and so on? Because it's this type of analysis that this type of excavating that can begin to unearth a lot of the questions that we have for ourselves. And it's also here where we will be able to shape a lot of our political views for the betterment of our people in ways that weren't previously applied, or in ways that we tried to apply, but that got thwarted for whatever reason. These are all very valid appraisals that I think that we need to be making on a daily basis. It's daily work, just like prayer, just like drinking water, just like eating. It's a part of the daily work. These types of questions and this type of analysis within ourselves, in our own individual lives, and in our relation to the larger world. It's within the intimate corners of ourselves that these problems can find their answers. I think that we've gotten comfortable pretty much with the atrophy of our minds, and that's very disheartening for me to witness on various levels, within the community, within my own personal family, within myself. Nobody is above it. We are all of this nation. We are all products of our history, and we are all called to work on our definitions and our assessment of our lives. And we would be absolutely mistaken to believe the lie, that a simple vote will replace centuries of horrific and historical baggage that we've accumulated and still carry into the present. I think that if Black people are going to vote in this country, and if we are going to exercise our right to, we've got a lot of rethinking and reshaping in front of us. In my view, it is absolutely negligible on our part to only, play interested in the political landscape every 4 years. It's just not going to work. We can't do that while throughout the time in between those 4 years, we are not interested in repairing our homes. We're not interested in repairing those family quarrels or our finances, or, aren't educating ourselves thoroughly on the cultural significance of our history. Things like that cannot just go unnoticed, but you want to tell me about who I should be voting for. If we aren't repairing the damages done over generations via centuries of oppression, self-sabotage, and self-hate, what are we really doing? Because it seems to me that is where the work is. First, if we are going to vote, How can we begin to take our cities more seriously? And get more in the know about how we can begin to vote for more local and state offices. How do we turn the quote unquote inner city that the government just loves citing so much into viable communities? How can we turn the term repping the block into a political stance and mindset? How dope would that be? We actually take the block seriously. We actually claim the block. How about those types of conversations? How do we begin to take more seriously the voting in of our city councils and our board of education members, etc., and begin holding them accountable for the conditions of our schools, for the quality of our hospitals, for the cleanliness of our transportation systems, and things of the like, things that quite literally affect the block. How can we begin to organize so that when the presidential elections do come along, we can impose demands specifically centralized around Black perspective, Black issues, Black concerns, and Black life, and present them, right? Present on the table money donated and invested to back only the candidate that is willing to present our issues to the national stage. There's a lot of information for us to familiarize ourselves with. Okay, there's a lot of law, there's a lot of history, a lot at hand. And it's going to require us to be erudite and studious. Okay, it's going to demand that we let go of distractions and menial indulgences if we are to take serious strides. It will require that we actually be serious about what we are saying. I know that there is a lot of talk among us, but what are we talking about if we are not talking about these things? What are we really doing, and where are we really standing? And to whose benefit and interest are we willing to devote our time except to our own needs, our own clarity, our own mobility? And don't get it twisted. There are many of us out here who are not, simply daydreaming, but people are out here putting their feet to pavement. They are out here. How can we support them? How do we get to know each other? When do we begin to see that as important, the knowing of each other? How can we be effective wherever we are in the country? What does that look like on us? It's a great question. I think a great majority of this rests on our willingness to accept Blackness as a political position in and of itself. Your Black life as ideology, as the movement. Okay, not seeing your Blackness as apart from one's political affiliation, so that whatever your association, you are able to think on a level that prioritizes your Black history, your Black culture as primary. Now, this mindset, I'm aware, stands in direct opposition to what many of us have been taught and have assumed. Okay, we've been made pretty much afraid to assert that posture. But it is in that unapologetic stance that holds the energy to shift our narrative. I'm convinced of that. We cannot blend in and simply become quote unquote American. And by that, I mean, assume this I don't see color posture, or, I just happen to be Black spokesperson. Hell's to the no. We are a specific people, and we have a specific history and a specific tie to this country. Our position as Black people is like no others in this country. No one bears the history that Black people hold in the Americas, period. No one. Our issues cannot be handled with an umbrella approach. It is what it is. Our history does not even fit under the umbrella. In fact, it's because Black people have this unique experience and history that we face our government oversimplifying, ignoring, and considering our history inconsequential. It's because they know that Black history and the Black presence in this country is the major and dominant issue that America has. And that America has also done its damnedest and its absolute best to shun and discard. It is the major focus that this country refuses to reckon with, and that is the legacy of chattel slavery, not to mention decades upon decades of legalized discrimination and racist laws and institutions that made certain that Black people would not advance in this country, and that were specifically made to thwart the lives, oppress the lives, and end the lives of Black people in this country. Alongside the genocide of the indigenous populations that the founding of this country rests upon, is the original sin of chattel slavery that this nation and this country's mother nation has to reckon with. There has been unprecedented attempts, you guys, to sweep such a vile origin and vile history under the rug for over 400 years. This is precisely why, for example, you get your talk points during election time without fail that make certain to distract the Black public with terms like immigration or abortion or things like same-sex marriages, etc., right? Not that none of those things are not at hand, but this is how they get to not address, how they get to not focus on the chief and foremost issue that stands to rectify all others. And that is the Black presence in this country and the only people who have been historically relegated to a second-class caste system and even deemed inhuman under the Constitution. The effects and ramifications of that persist today. Don't tell me about immigration issues, okay, concerning people that you've opened your borders to. When you've got a population here that is the only population in this country that has not immigrated. African people and their descendants have not immigrated here via chattel slavery. They were brought here forcefully against their will. All of this coded language, in these elections and just in the parlance in general, culturally, in America, is all to, mystify the public, Black people, and beyond our culture, just the country as a whole. Because in the collective knowing this history, that will lead ultimately to people asking questions. That would ultimately lead to one's cognizance and a sense of intelligibility about that history and about the reality of what is going on and how we are all affected by that reality. This is why so many distractions are at place and are at work via, various means, various measures and systems to keep you distracted, to keep people like me and you from talking, from engaging, from researching, from studying, from dissecting ourselves, from getting answers from the elders, from going to non-Western based sources of anthropology, psychology, and epistemology. The distractions are heavy. The distractions say, hey, look at Megan's ass twerking on the screen for you. You know what I'm saying? How about you focus on who's dating who? How about you focus on man versus woman? Or, hey, you know what? Isn't Trump like 50 Cent? He survived the shooting. And every other distraction that you could imagine. Black people, we do not have the time to play. We do not have the luxury of playing around and wasting our time. Whether you are voting left or right alone is of limited consequence in relation to the intimate history and the intimate life of the Black experience. That's the message. If the going mindset is that a political stance is assumed and exemplified by simply waving a banner at a voting rally or in cheerleading one candidate on to smite another candidate, in that sense, will always and perpetually be slighted, unheeded, and disregarded in this country. The change is in taking ourselves seriously. The change is in heeding ourselves and in learning once and for all the lessons that we've managed to survive. But it seems that we've survived in parts. And that's okay, so long as the parts that remain are valuable to us, are claimed by us, and empowered by us. That is among the work of reparation. Foolish allegiances to people who uphold a system that doesn't see you is not for the upliftment of our culture. Where is your work outside of the vote? After your ballot is cast and you walk away and you turn the key in your lock and you walk into your home, what work is being done there? Let's think about that so that we can begin asking all other types of necessary questions that can bring about necessary actions. Black, no sugar, please. Peace.